In this lecture, I would like to talk a little bit about an interesting episode that took place in the 16th century in Europe with two messianic figures that rose up to significant position in in different places along Europe and kind of reached a few heights where significant figures from Europe, royalty and leadership were willing to meet these figures and to hear them out. Maybe, maybe there's something out there. Eventually, it ended up that both of these figures, David Reuveni and Shlomo Molcho, have found their death in a typical way in which, people used to find their death in Europe if the kings did not support them, which is they were executed, burned to death, and this is how their messianic story has ended. People who claim to be Jewish Messiah, they ended up on the stake, they ended up executed, and the story has ended. And actually, the story of Reuveni and Molcho um, did not leave any unique impact on Jewish history. And the only reason we even know about them and their story is because Reuveni's diary was preserved and saved, and in the 19th century it was like reprinted, and so it became more familiar. There's no record of him from other Jewish sources, like his story did not survive like the Jewish history, but his records, some records have been lasted and remained and preserved, and this is how we know the story, this unique story of David Reuveni, in which recently a book called, the title of the book is The Black Jewish Messiah, and I want to address his skin color. It is apparently significant. So try to move to the next page. Okay, so who was Reuveni? So first of all, his name, this is a messianic name, yeah? David Reuveni. And the name represents a religious significance. His real name probably was not that name. But why David? And apparently this is something that is common to many people who claim to be Jewish Messiah. And if you are familiar with something that happened in the United States with David Koresh, and this is also a symbolic name, that mass killing that took place in Texas in 1992, with a religious movement that they all committed suicide, and headed by a man called David Koresh. Again, this was not his real name. This was a name that he adopted to himself to claim to be a Messiah. So why David? Because in the Jewish tradition, the Messiah has to come from the line of David. Yeah, and this is why, by the way, this is why Christians uh, trace the lineage of Jesus to King David as well. Yeah, and this is why they trace him to Bethlehem, because of that, because of this messianic role. So David he called himself David in order to claim to be a descendant of King David, therefore a, suit, a suitable candidate for the Messiah. And Reuveni, I say Reuveni, but the translation Reubeni, yes. And why? What is unique about Reuveni? It is descendant of the tribe of Reuven. And so what's the story of the tribe of Reuven? Um, according to Jewish history, when the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, they exiled the tribes and they exiled them east. And there was a certain river, Sambation, it's called the river Sambation. And the legend said that those 10 tribes, the 10 lost tribes of Israel, are like living outside, beyond the river Sambation. This is a legend, yes? So when at the end of times, these 10 lost tribes will find a way to return to the Jewish fold. And therefore, those 10 lost tribes will reappear. And while Jews are living in their, terrible conditions in Europe, and we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes, and the situation is bad. Overall, it's bad. And there was expectation that there would come a Messiah who would save the Jews, who lift them up, take them from their miseries, take them from their pain, and take them to their ancient land, and will restore their ancient kingdom, restore the temple, restore the kingdom, restore the Sanhedrin. But um, Jews may need some extra help. And this extra help would come from the 10 tribes that will be rediscovered, and they will come to their assistance, and they will fight, the Christians, and they will fight the Muslims, and they will allow, this kingdom. So this extra help and this miracle that there will be found and they will return kind of fueled the imagination of Jews, during medieval times, There's hope. And those 10 tribes, there's a chance that these 10 tribes will return. And so when this individual appeared in the year 1525 and start making arguments about the 10 tribes and about himself and about his brother, um, people were listening. Not just Jews, but also Christians. They had their motivations. Not just, and Jews had their own motivations. So when he said, I am a descendant of the tribe of Reuven, I am a member of these 10 tribes, and he was a black man. Yeah. He was what we call African today, African American. Yeah. He was not American, of course. Yeah. He was a black man. And he said, I'm Jewish, I'm descendant of King David, and I'm coming from the 10 lost tribes. And this was, wow, mind-blowing, especially for Jews in Spain. Actually, they were not Jews. They had a special, unique status at that time. And it was also appealing, apparently, also to the Pope. And he claimed to be the brother of a Jewish king across that famous river, Sambation, the kingdom of Habur, and and he started a journey, and he went to Jerusalem. No coincidence. He went to, so it's not clear where exactly he came, but he was black, so it means that he came from Africa. And where exactly, the story that he tells about his past were more like imaginary, because there was no kingdom of Habur and there was no Jewish kingdom in Africa, but he was a black man. It's unclear exactly where he came from and what's his biographical information is. And he went to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount, and the way he described Jerusalem sounds correct. Sounds correct. So it feels like he might have received an entry into the Temple Mount. And according to his own testimony, he was disguised as a Muslim. So this is maybe the reason why they allowed him in. And this is again the messianic role, yes? A king, a Jewish Messiah will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. So there's a significance here that he's telling he went to Jerusalem, he went to the Temple Mount, and from there he went to Rome, and he came to speak with the Pope. Amazingly enough, the Pope accepted him. It was because of the Jewish community in Rome. The Jewish community in Rome were able to arrange a meeting with the Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church, and the Pope was, and he had a special message to the Pope. He came up with a plan for the Pope to raise an army, a crusade, to go after Mecca. Mecca is the holy city of Islam. Mecca is where the shrines of Islam, like the main shrines of Islam, are located. The Kaaba, you know. So if you conquer Mecca, if Christians, if the Pope were able to raise an army and conquer Mecca, it will be the defeat of Islam. Yeah. And this will have a messianic meaning, yes. Christians defeat Islam, their main enemy. And and the Pope was willing to listen to this idea coming from a man who claimed to be a Jewish Messiah, which fits, which fits Christian prophecies about the end times, yeah, about the Antichrist, about a messianic figure that will come from the Jews. And the Pope sent him to Portugal to meet the King of Portugal, and he sent him a letter that he supports his mission, and he asked the King of Portugal if he will be willing to accept him. And the King of Portugal did meet him, but did not follow with his plan and did not arrest him. Yeah. In Portugal, he met a Christian person. His name was Diego Pires. And that man became very amazed by Reuveni, and he decided to convert to Judaism, and he changed his name to Shlomo Molcho. Now let's pay attention to this name. If Reuveni is David, so who's David's son? Solomon, yes? So he's like continuing. This is David and this is Solomon, two kings, two famous kings, biblical kings of the Bible. And then his last name, Molkho. Molkho means a king. Yeah. So here we have David from the 10 tribes, followed by Solomon, the king, and they both are going back to France, to Rome, to try, to build this plan to create a Jewish army and to create a Christian army, Christian army, and to go and conquer Mecca. And the King of France was less receptive to this idea. He put them in jail and he executed them eventually. The story ended there. Now, this could have been an episode we never would have known anything about it. But the diary, some documents were preserved, and this is why we know about this episode. Now, why would the Pope, would the King of Portugal, why would them even be willing to consider? Think about it, the Pope, even consider, this idea. They were willing to listen. They were willing to grant some kind of support, letters of support. So we have to understand this, the situation we're talking about, 1525, that this is when it's starting. It goes all the way 10, 12 more years. What has happened in Europe at that time? So first, I pointed to Christopher Columbus. He has sailed from France, 25 years, like 35 years earlier. This is 1492. He leaves Spain and he discovers a place he called India. Yeah, but this place is not India. This is what we call today America. Yeah. And it filters down, it takes time. It's not like today, like there's internet, it takes time. But this creates big speculations, about, discovering new continents. Something new is being discovered. It must reflect something. It opens a big, a big range of opportunities. And so it means something, yes, it means something. And people of deep faith, Christian faith, could not completely disregard this discovery of the new continent that we call today America, yeah, as something that is meaningless. And another thing happened in 1517, Europe is beginning a big transformation with the rise of the Reformation. So basically, the hegemony of the Catholic Church, and listen, Rome, the Pope, Spain, Portugal, these are all Catholic places, yes, that they were not affected by the Reformation, but other parts of Europe were affected by the Reformation. We're talking about Germany, we're talking about England, we're talking about Sweden, Scandinavia, yeah, these all became Reformed or Protestant, and this big, dispute that took a very long time, hundreds of years, to develop in Europe, between Catholics and Protestants. So this was starting to happen exactly at that time. And in addition to that, also the Ottoman Empire starting to establish itself at that same time with conquests and with significant growth that is also affecting Rome and the Christian lands of Europe, where Suleiman the Magnificent, who built the famous walls of Jerusalem, as becoming the emperor of the Ottoman Empire, and Ottoman is becoming a significant power in that region. Yes, so from all of those perspectives, the discovery of America, the split inside Europe between Protestant and Catholics, and the pressure coming from the East, from the Muslims, all of those things created a lot of a stressful moment for the Catholic Church, a stressful. And when someone suddenly shows up at the gates of the Pope, coming with an idea how to kind of like switch everything around, to blend everything around by sending a new crusade to conquer Mecca, when all of this kind of like takes place at the same time, the Pope is willing to listen. Yeah, he's willing to listen, no more than that. He's just willing to listen. He's willing to go ahead with that. And he's willing to send this Jewish the guy that proclaims to be, a Jewish Messiah, is willing to send him to see if he can convince some Christian kingdoms to do that, to go ahead with this plan. And he sends him to Portugal. So that's kind of explain, why the Pope was even willing, and why the King of Portugal was willing even to listen to him, to consider it, to think about it, to examine it through its own ways. So, by the way, in order to get to Mecca, you have to go all over Africa and through the Sea of Reeds to get into with your ships to Mecca, which only people who are close to with good access to the sea, to the ocean, can do. This will explain why Spain or Portugal were kind of like the first to consider this plan of go ahead and raising military and to go and fight Mecca with the promise that there will be a Jewish kingdom that is waiting for them and will help them to go and fight and defeat the Muslims. Yes, as a holy war, as a crusade. Now, what was the appeal among Jews? So we need to understand the the traumatic events of 1942, 1492 in Jewish history. This was a turning point in Jewish history, which created a very deep and significant transformation in the history of Jews, and it is very significant also for understanding, the future of Judaism moving forward a few hundred years, to understand the trauma of the expulsion from Spain. Jews are expelled from Spain. So basically, the Spanish kingdom gave Jews two options. One option is to convert to Christianity, and the second option was to leave. Yes. So many Jews decided to leave, and the Ottoman Empire welcomed them, and they established their centers in North Africa, like Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, or they went straight to the heart of the Ottoman Empire, to Turkey and Greece. So this is what we call the Sfaradim. Yes, the Sfaradim, the people who were exiled from Spain, and they kept the Spanish tradition with the language of Ladino and all kinds of other ways to like remember their identity as Spanish. And this created a very strong trauma on that Jewry at that time, Jews at that time, which manifested itself with the development and raising a new level of mystical teachings, which we'll discuss in a different lecture. And so some Jews decided to leave Spain, some Jews decided to stay in Spain. Now, if they stay in Spain, they have to accept the Christian religion, the Catholic religion, the Christian religion. And having said that, the Spanish society never really accepted them as equal. So when we are talking about Jewish-Christian relations, overall speaking, Christians always wanted to convert Jews to become, Christians. And this has been going on for a long time. But the view was that once you converted, you are a Christian. Once you are baptized, you are a Christian. And you're equal to any other Christian. You're entitled for salvation like anyone else. But with that mass conversions of Jews in Spain in the 1500s, they were not really treated as equal to other Christians. And there was suspicion toward them. They were not allowed certain positions. So they were kind of like second-grade Christians. They were considered second-grade Christians. And they were called the conversos, the converts, or the marranos, which was some kind of a term that came to kind of view them as not equal. And many of them, they were forced to convert. They didn't want to leave Spain. They were forced to convert. and they didn't really, believe in Christianity. They were doing it, to pretend. And the fact that they were not welcomed by the Christian society also played a role. They were not allowed, to leave their communities. They were treated as second grade. It also played a role in in their identity. And many just kept their Judaism in secrecy. Many kept their Judaism in secrecy. And how do we know that? Because once they got the opportunity to leave Spain, many of them returned to Judaism. And and this will be the subject of our next lecture, would be on the next movement of of messianic expectations. But I'm heading myself. So because the Christians knew that many of those who converted are not really sincere in their conversion, they invented this institution called the Inquisition. The Inquisition was intended to make sure that people who converted are sincere. And if they are not sincere, so the Inquisition will come and make inquiries. Yes, that's the root of the word inquisition. They will make inquiries. And if they will decide that you are not sincere, then you will meet a terrible death. That's kind of like it was. The Inquisition was very well known with its method of torture and all of those things. And and the Inquisition also kept the record of the interrogations. So this is why we know a lot about the Inquisition today and the people they inquired, yes, so to say, which they most likely through torture. And so it gives us a lot of knowledge about this group of Marranos, conversos, that lived in Spain and other parts of Europe. Um, because of the interrogations, that the record of the interrogation was has remained. And so in Hebrew they were called anusim. Anusim is a term that comes to say that they were, in modern Hebrew, when we use this term anas, ones, it means rape. So we can say that these people are were raped to become Christians, like they were coerced to become Christians, and they kept like Jewish identity in secrecy. And so this situation, which is a very hopeless situation, think about it, it's a very hopeless situation. From the one hand, they are not Jews. On the other hand, they are not accepted as Christians, and they have to fear the Inquisition, and they have to be very careful. If they want to keep their Jewish identity, they have to be very, extremely careful, because if the Inquisition is calling you for interrogation, that's it. You're done. So they have to keep very careful about their Judaism, and they don't have rabbis, and they don't have books, and they don't have anything. So what do they have? They have a hope. They have a hope for a Messiah who would come and save them. And so when David Reuveni and David Molkho showed up in Spain and in Portugal and gave them hope, many were willing to give it a try. So going back to Reuveni, yes, flipping back to Reuveni, he found people who were willing to follow him, to give him a try. It was a time where people were looking for hope, both Jews and Christians. And he devised a plan. He will make Christians fight Muslims. And in the meanwhile, Jews will go to their homeland. This was the plan. Not a very sophisticated plan, but this was the plan. He will plant an idea in the head of Christians to go and fight Muslims and start a new crusade. And in between, in between, Jews will escape. He used his charisma and he used his looks. He told a story about himself. He probably was very elegant. He looked like a rich person. He was well versed in Jewish teachings. He probably like knew how to speak with the Pope and how to speak with kings. Um, and for a while, the rulers of Europe, were willing to listen. And as said, his diary was preserved. At some point, the rulers of Europe were less inclined to listen to this kind of strange black man that is appearing in their courts and telling them stories about the Messiah and about a big plan to go on a new crusade. And they ended it. They killed him, they destroyed him, and destroyed his followers. And this was the end of it. There was no real impact to his story. We know about him today because his diary was preserved. So because of some documents that were preserved, and this is why we know about him. And he touched a chord. He touched a chord, both of Jews and on conversos that were living in horrible conditions in Europe. He touched a chord. The Jews were expelled. Their houses were destroyed. They were sent into disarray, into misery, into starting everything from new, from scratch. And they were looking for hope. And he gave them hope. His hope ended up with nothing. But he was not the only one who was trying to give hope. And this was the point where Kabbalistic teachings of Kabbalah, received a new and a higher level of authority among Jews because of a new set of books that are starting to be generated in the Holy Land by mystics. And those books kind of like create a new understanding of Jewish history. This will be the topic of a different lecture. And and um, and as a result, a new messianic figure is rising up to high levels among the Jews. This time, a figure that will leave behind him a lasting and strong uh, influence. His name is Shabtai Tzvi. That a movement that he will generate will be of estimated at 1 million followers, big hopes, big expectations. Later on, big disappointments, and a new understanding of the role of messianism and Kabbalah and mysticism that developed later into a new movement after Shabtai Tzvi, a movement that exists until today, Hasidic Judaism. So we see the expulsion from Spain creates new understanding of Jewish history with mystical teachings, create messianic figures. Reuveni, Molkho is an example of these messianic expectations. And then 100 years after them, a much bigger movement comes to play. It's the Sabbatian movement and Shabtai Tzvi. And so this is kind of like the end of this lecture. And this is it.